My name is Morgan Fletcher. At my billionaire grandmother's final asset announcement in our Napa Valley estate, they branded me a thief right in front of everyone who had ever pretended to care. My mother, Denise, rose first, her designer heels clicking like a judge's gavel, a cold smirk on her face, as she said, "Money really does reveal people's true colors." My father, Alan, leaned forward, voice low and cutting. "This family never taught you to live so dishonestly." My younger sister, Chelsea, curled her lip and added with venom, "Sis, haven't you acted enough? Stop craving what isn't yours." The room fell dead silent. Every pair of eyes turned to me, accusing, convinced, waiting for me to crumble. Whispers rippled like poison nods of agreement, spreading fast as if my guilt was already written in stone. I sat there, hands clenched tight under the table, heart pounding, but I didn't say a word. Because right then, my grandmother Helen's quiet warning from months ago echoed clearly in my mind. If they come for you, don't rush to fight back. Let the truth do the talking. The attorney, Mr. Langley, closed his leather folder with deliberate calm and said, "Your grandmother anticipated this exact moment." He turned his laptop toward the large screen mounted above the fireplace. In that instant, the air in the room changed, thickened with a dread no one could name yet. The hidden camera began to play. If you've ever been wrongly accused by family over money, or watched loved ones completely change after a will was read, drop your story in the comments below. How did you handle it? And if this opening feels all too familiar, stick around to see how the truth turned everything upside down. As the first frames flickered on the screen, my mind snapped back to how the afternoon had started, just us gathering in that same room, waiting for everything to unfold. The office felt both familiar and foreign. Dark oak panels lined the walls, absorbing the late afternoon light that poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking endless rows of vines stretching across Napa Valley. The air carried a faint, earthy scent from the open fields outside, mixed with the subtle leather aroma from the high-backed chairs arranged around the long mahogany table. A small fire crackled in the stone fireplace, more for tradition than need on a mild California day. Everyone arrived dressed like it was a board meeting rather than a family matter. Mom wore a sleek black sheath dress that hugged her figure, paired with heels sharp enough to match her expression. Dad had chosen a charcoal suit tie knotted perfectly, exuding the quiet authority he always projected in business settings. Chelsea sparkled with layered necklaces and bracelets that caught the light every time she moved, scrolling through her phone without a care. Aunt Marcia clutched a designer handbag on her lap, her outfit polished but slightly overstated, as if she wanted to remind everyone she still belonged in this world. I took the chair in the corner, the one slightly removed from the main circle, the same spot Grandma Helen used to save for me during visits. From there, I watched them settle in. Dad claimed the head of the table without discussion, leaning back, as though the estate already belonged to him. Mom sat to his right, glancing at her watch every few minutes, fingers tapping impatiently. Chelsea dropped into the seat across from her legs, crossed, already complaining about the drive from the city. Aunt Marcia hovered before choosing a spot near Mom, offering tight smiles and small talk about the weather. Mr. Langley hadn't arrived yet, so the room filled with superficial chatter. Dad mentioned recent wine auction prices, noting how the vineyard's reputation kept pushing values higher. Mom agreed, adding comments about potential expansions she had researched. Chelsea chimed in with stories of influencers she knew who wanted private tours, turning the conversation toward branding opportunities. Aunt Marcia nodded along, asking about resale values for some of the smaller lots on the edge of the property. No one brought up Grandma. Not her laugh echoing through the halls during harvest season, not the way she'd sit by those windows sketching new label designs late into the evening. It was as if her absence was just a formality, a brief pause before discussing what really mattered: the assets. I stayed quiet, tracing the grain of the wood on the armrest with my thumb. Being here again stirred memories I wasn't ready to share with them. The last time I'd sat in this exact chair, Grandma had been alive, showing me updated trust documents and asking my thoughts on scholarships for local kids who couldn't afford college. She trusted my judgment because I never asked for anything in return. As the minutes dragged, I noticed small details that felt off. Mr. Langley's briefcase was already on the side table placed there earlier by staff, but he stepped in only after everyone was seated. His greeting was professional eyes scanning the room before lingering on me a fraction longer than usual, like he was checking I was ready for what came next. Then my gaze drifted to the wall behind him. One of the framed vineyard photographs hung slightly crooked, not enough for most people to notice, but I remembered helping Grandma straighten it during my last visit. She had laughed about her arthritis making simple tasks harder. Now it was off by maybe an inch. Odd, considering how particular the housekeeping staff was. The conversation lulled as Mr. Langley organized his papers. Dad cleared his throat, steering talk back to market trends, predicting another record year for premium Cabernet. Mom pulled up something on her phone showing Chelsea an article about luxury wine investments. Aunt Marcia leaned in, asking questions that revealed she'd been doing her own research. I shifted in my seat, feeling the weight of their words. They spoke about the estate like a portfolio, not a home where Grandma had built everything from scratch after Grandpa passed young. She started with a single plot, turning it into one of California's most respected labels through sheer determination. Yet here they were already dividing pieces in their minds. Mr. Langley finally adjusted his glasses and opened the main folder. The room quieted instantly, chairs creaking as everyone leaned forward. He began with preliminary remarks about the legal process, his voice steady and neutral. I caught him glancing my way again, a subtle nod that no one else seemed to notice. Outside the windows, the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across the vines. It was the kind of evening Grandma loved most, peaceful, full of promise. But inside, tension built like an approaching storm. They had no idea what was coming, but something in the air, in those small, misplaced details, told me Grandma had made sure the truth wouldn't stay hidden. That crooked photograph on the wall pulled my thoughts further back to the day everything changed for Grandma Helen, when she discovered the forged signature on a critical vineyard transfer contract. She had called me that weekend, voice steady but edged with something I rarely heard from her, anger mixed with disappointment. I drove up from San Francisco right away, the familiar route winding through rolling hills until the estate came into view. Grandma met me at the door herself, leaning on her cane more than usual, her arthritis flaring up again. We went straight to her private study where she spread out the documents on the desk. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the signature page. It was supposed to authorize a minor land swap with a neighboring property, nothing major. But the handwriting wasn't hers, the loops too tight, the pressure inconsistent. She had never signed it yet. There, it was notarized and filed. Someone had imitated her mark well enough to fool initial checks, but not her. She knew her own hand like she knew every vine on the property. We spent hours going over it. Grandma explained how the contract could open doors to larger deals she never intended, potentially diluting control of the core vineyards she had fought decades to protect. She suspected it came from within the family circle, people with access to samples of her writing, people who stood to gain from loosening her grip. That realization hit her hard. The woman who had built an empire from a single inherited plot after Grandpa died young, who had outnegotiated bankers and competitors without ever raising her voice, now faced betrayal from her own blood. It was after that incident that she made the decision. She consulted Mr. Langley privately, then quietly had additional security cameras installed in the storage rooms and guest areas, places where sensitive papers and valuables were kept. In California, as the property owner, she had every right to monitor her own home without notifying family members, especially when protecting against potential fraud. She told me about it one evening as we walked slowly along the paths between the vines, her arm linked through mine for support. Those weekend visits became my anchor. I would leave the city early Saturday morning, arriving before the fog fully lifted from the valley. Grandma waited on the porch with coffee, and we'd start with a gentle stroll through the rows of Cabernet grapes, her favorite. She moved carefully, pausing to touch the leaves or check the soil, sharing stories of the early days, buying that first parcel with savings from waiting tables, planting by hand, learning winemaking from books and trial. "No one handed me this," she'd say, eyes bright, despite the pain in her joints. "I earned every acre." Back inside, we'd review charity reports together. Grandma had set up a foundation years ago for rural California kids' scholarships, covering tuition books, even living expenses for those from farming families who dreamed beyond the fields. She wanted them to have options she never did growing up. I helped sort applications, reading essays from teenagers, talking about veterinary school or engineering kids who reminded her of her younger self. We discussed which ones showed real grit, debating over tea in the afternoons. But beneath the routine, her loneliness surfaced more often. She spoke openly about noticing patterns, how Mom and Dad's visits coincided with needing approvals for their own ventures, how conversations always circled back to expansion ideas that benefited them. "They see numbers," she confessed once, staring out at the horizon. "Not the land, not the legacy. Just what it can buy." It hurt her deeply, realizing her daughter and son-in-law prioritized growth projections over the woman who made it possible. One quiet Sunday, as sunlight faded across the vineyard, Grandma took my hand in hers, her fingers thin but strong. "Morgan," she said softly, "if anything happens, promise me you'll trust the process. I've put things in place to make sure the right person carries this forward, the one who values it for what it truly is." She didn't elaborate on the details, no mention of specific evidence or recordings. Just that assurance, everything would come clear when needed. I squeezed her hand, promising without fully understanding the weight of what she meant. Those moments sustained me. Driving back to the city that night, I felt privileged to be the one she confided in, the one who listened without an agenda. Grandma never asked for favors in return. She simply wanted company, honesty, someone to share the burden of what she had built. And in protecting that, she prepared for the worst, ensuring no one could twist her intentions after she was gone. Mr. Langley cleared his throat and began reading the will in his measured, professional tone, starting with the smaller bequests, as Grandma had specified. First, he addressed Dad. "To my son-in-law, Alan Fletcher, I leave the sum of $500,000 along with 3 minor landscape paintings from my personal collection in the East Wing." Dad nodded slowly, the corners of his mouth tightening just enough to betray his composure. He shifted in his chair, fingers drumming once on the armrest before stopping, his gaze fixed on the table, as if calculating how far that amount would stretch against his expectations for a share of the vineyards. The attorney continued without pause. "To my daughter, Denise Fletcher, I bequeath the secondary family jewelry, set the pearls and the sapphire pendant ensemble appraised at a moderate value." Mom's grip on the chair arm whitened her knuckles, but she said nothing. Her eyes narrowed slightly, scanning the page Mr. Langley held as though searching for a mistake. Her posture rigid in a way that spoke volumes about the gap between what she anticipated and what she received. Next came Chelsea. "To my granddaughter, Chelsea Fletcher, I establish a trust fund equivalent to full college tuition and related expenses, contingent upon her completing her degree and maintaining steady employment for a minimum of 1 consecutive year thereafter." Chelsea let out a soft scoff, barely audible, muttering something under her breath about restrictions. She crossed her arms, leaning back with a pout that made her look younger than her early 20s, clearly irritated by the strings attached to what she probably viewed as her rightful windfall. Finally, Aunt Marcia. "To my sister's daughter, Marcia Powell, I grant the right to use the vacation property at Lake Tahoe for a period of 7 years, after which it shall be sold, and the proceeds directed to the established charitable trust." Aunt Marcia exhaled sharply, her eyes darting around the room as if mentally appraising the home's market value and running numbers on 7 years of free lakeside living. She adjusted her handbag on her lap, lips pressed thin in quiet reassessment. With each announcement, I watched their reactions unfold like a slow reveal. Dad's initial politeness gave way to subtle tension in his jaw, the kind he showed during failed negotiations. Mom's silence felt loaded, her breathing controlled but deeper than usual, betraying the disappointment she refused to voice. Chelsea fidgeted more openly, her foot tapping against the leg of her chair, glancing at Mom for cues on how to respond. Aunt Marcia offered a weak smile to no one in particular, but her fingers twisted the handle of her bag, calculating what temporary access really meant in the grand scheme. No one mentioned Grandma's memory, no stories of her generosity, no quiet gratitude for what she had chosen to give. Instead, the focus stayed on the inadequacy of these portions compared to the empire she built. The vineyards outside produced wines that sold for hundreds per bottle, the brand recognized worldwide, yet these bequests felt like crumbs to them. I could sense the undercurrent confusion turning to frustration brewing into something sharper. Mr. Langley turned the page, his expression unchanged. The room grew quieter, the crackle from the fireplace suddenly louder in the hush. Dad leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table now. Mom's eyes locked on the attorney, unblinking. Chelsea stopped tapping, sitting up straighter. Aunt Marcia set her bag aside, fully attentive. I remained still, pulse steady, despite the building pressure. These smaller gifts were deliberate. Grandma had explained conditional giving during one of our talks, how it encouraged responsibility rather than entitlement. But seeing it play out, watching their faces shift from expectation to quiet resentment, confirmed what she feared most. The legacy meant more to them as a balance sheet than as her life's work. The attorney adjusted his glasses once more, scanning the next section. Everyone held their breath, the weight of the remaining estate hanging in the air like the valley fog at dawn. Whatever came next would change everything they knew it, and so did I. Mom pushed back her chair and stood abruptly, her voice trembling with barely contained emotion as she pointed directly at me. Morgan took advantage of every moment she spent alone with Grandma, she said, eyes glistening like this was genuine hurt rather than strategy. Those small paintings from the guest suites, the antique jewelry pieces that vanished one by one, she had full access, and we all know it. How else could they disappear without a trace? Dad didn't hesitate, rising more slowly to lend weight to his words, speaking with the measured tone he used in boardrooms. Legally, this raises serious questions. Morgan was the only one with regular keys to the private safe during Grandma's declining health. Undue influence isn't just a phrase, it's grounds to challenge any will if someone in a vulnerable state was manipulated. We can't ignore the pattern here. You? Chelsea jumped in before I could process Dad's calculated strike, her tone dripping with sarcasm as she rolled her eyes dramatically. Oh please, the perfect granddaughter act was always suspicious, showing up every weekend playing the devoted one while the rest of us had lives. It was all about positioning yourself, wasn't it? Pretending to care so deeply when really you were just waiting for the payoff. Aunt Marcia cleared her throat softly, adding her piece with outstanding voice, calm but pointed. I hate to bring this up, but a friend in the antique circle mentioned seeing someone matching Morgan's description at a valuation shop in San Francisco last year. Nothing concrete, of course, but it does make you wonder about those missing items. The accusations hit from every side, overlapping before I could respond to one. I opened my mouth to explain that Grandma herself had asked me to catalog certain pieces for insurance updates, that everything I touched was at her direct request, but Mom cut me off with a sharp, "How convenient that only you were there to witness it." Dad continued over her, building his case. Access plus opportunity equals responsibility. If valuables went missing under your watch, Morgan, the burden falls on you to prove otherwise. Chelsea laughed lightly, a sound that cut deeper than shouting. Come on, admit it. The caring routine was just a long game. All those visits weren't free. Even Aunt Marcia nodded along, murmuring about how patterns don't lie. I tried again, voice steady despite the heat rising in my chest. Grandma trusted me with those things because she wanted updates for the foundation records. I never trusted you, Mom interrupted, voice cracking for effect. She was frail, confused at times. You were in the perfect position to sway her. The room closed in their words, layering like a net I couldn't escape. Dad's legal framing made it sound official. Mom's emotional pleas tugged at doubt. Chelsea's barbs turned it personal. Aunt Marcia's second-hand rumor added credibility from outside. They fed off each other, building momentum without pause. I glanced at Mr. Langley, hoping for intervention, but he remained composed, watching the exchange unfold exactly as planned. The air grew thick, almost hard to breathe, the once familiar office now a courtroom where I stood accused without a proper defense. They didn't yell, that would have been easier to counter. Instead, it was this coordinated assault, emotion, logic, mockery, hearsay, all aimed at painting me as the opportunist who'd stolen not just objects, but Grandma's final wishes. My hands trembled beneath the table, but I held my tongue, remembering her advice more vividly than ever. The truth would surface soon enough. Mr. Langley raised one hand palm out, his voice, cutting through the barrage with quiet authority that demanded instant compliance. Enough, he said, calm but unyielding. Mrs. Helen Fletcher foresaw this exact reaction after the forged contract incident and prepared accordingly. She left clear instructions and evidence to address any attempts to distort her intentions. He opened the laptop, fully connecting it to the large wall-mounted screen with practiced efficiency. The room went still, the earlier venom hanging unresolved as everyone turned toward the display. The first clip began without introduction. Time-stamped footage from a storage room camera showed Mom slipping in late at night on multiple occasions, moving with familiarity toward locked cabinets. She selected small framed paintings and antique jewelry boxes, carefully placing them into her familiar leather tote before exiting as quietly as she arrived. The clarity left no room for doubt, dates spanning several months each entry, methodical, no signs of hesitation. Silence gripped the office. Mom's face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing once before she managed a weak defense. Those were just... I was borrowing them for safekeeping. Grandma knew. Dad shot to his feet, chair scraping harshly, ready to object, but Mr. Langley lifted a finger, pausing the video. Please sit down, Mr. Fletcher. There's more, and interruptions won't change what's recorded. He advanced to the next file, a short audio segment, voice identification labels marking the speakers clearly. Mom's voice came through, first low and deliberate. If we pin the missing items on Morgan, no one will question contesting the will. She's the only one with constant access. Dad responded, tone calculated. Exactly. Undue influence claim holds weight when valuables disappear under one person's watch. We control the narrative, secure the vineyards and the investment funds. The clip ended abruptly, Mr. Langley noting it was only a portion, the full recording preserved for legal proceedings if needed. He didn't play everything, holding back to maintain leverage. I stared at the frozen screen, a wave of shock crashing over me, quickly hardening into raw anger. Hearing my own parents, Mom who had carried me, Dad who taught me to ride a bike on these grounds, plotting so coldly to frame me, felt like a physical blow. Their words weren't heated arguments. They were strategic, detached, as if destroying my reputation was just another business move to seize control of what Grandma built. Mom sank back into her seat, hands covering her face briefly before dropping to reveal wide, panicked eyes. Dad remained standing a moment longer, jaw clenched, searching for an angle that wasn't there. Chelsea's earlier smirk vanished, replaced by uneasy shifting. Aunt Marcia looked away, suddenly fascinated by her nails. The warmth from the fireplace did nothing against the chill settling over everything. What had been a coordinated attack minutes ago now crumbled under undeniable proof. Mom's emotional accusations, Dad's legal threats, Chelsea's barbs. They all rang hollow against the evidence Grandma had gathered. Mr. Langley let the silence stretch, ensuring the impact landed fully. He closed the laptop partially, his expression unchanged. These recordings were made on private property with full legal authority. Any attempt to dispute their validity will only reinforce Mrs. Fletcher's concerns. I felt the shift inside me, relief mixed with profound sadness. Grandma hadn't just predicted this. She had protected me from it, turning their scheme against them. The parents I thought I knew were capable of this level of calculation, willing to sacrifice my name for financial gain. Dad finally sat, voice strained. There must be context. Mr. Langley cut him off gently but firmly. Context will be examined in due course if necessary through proper channels. Mom whispered something inaudible, tears starting now, but they felt more like defeat than remorse. The plot they discussed so casually was exposed, their plan to contest and redirect the estate's core assets laid bare. Anger burned steady in my chest, but I stayed composed. Grandma's warning holding me together. This wasn't the end, far from it. The truth was only beginning to unfold. Mr. Langley clicked to the final file, his movements deliberate as the screen adjusted once more. Grandma Helen appeared seated in her bedroom armchair by the wide window, the golden hues of sunset filtering through and casting a warm glow over the distant vines. She looked frailer than in my recent memories, wrapped in her favorite shawl, but her eyes held that familiar, sharp clarity. She spoke directly to the camera, voice soft, yet unwavering. "I've made my choices," she began, pausing to steady her breath. "Morgan, you were the only one who showed up without expecting something back. You listened, you cared, you shared the quiet days when no one else bothered. That's why the remainder of my estate, the Napa Valley residence, the vineyards, the wine label, the investment portfolio goes entirely to you." Mom let out a sharp gasp, hand flying to her mouth. Dad froze, face tightening as the words sank in. Grandma continued without flourish. "This includes the plans we discussed for expanding educational support scholarships and programs for rural California children who need a real chance at college or trade skills. You'll know how to honor that." She turned slightly toward the lens as if addressing the room we now occupied. "Denise Allen, I see the greed that drove you. Attempts to twist my intentions to undermine the one person who was genuinely here won't succeed. My decisions are final, backed by every legal safeguard available. Challenge them and you'll face consequences through the courts and authorities." Her tone carried no bitterness, just resolute fact. "Truth protects those who deserve it, that's all." The video ended abruptly, the screen fading to black. The office felt suspended in that moment. Mom stared ahead, tears spilling silently now, her earlier composure shattered. Dad gripped the table, edge knuckles pale, processing the complete reversal. Chelsea slumped back, all fight gone from her posture. Aunt Marcia kept her gaze down, avoiding everyone's eyes. I sat motionless, a rush of emotions flooding through me, grief for hearing Grandma's voice again, validation that she had trusted me completely, and a deep ache at how far things had fallen with my own parents. She hadn't ranted or accused dramatically. She stated realities plainly, ensuring her legacy went where it belonged. Mr. Langley let the weight settle before speaking. "As Mrs. Fletcher outlined, the will includes robust protections. Any contest will trigger enforcement of the terms she referenced." Dad found his voice first strained. "This can't. There has to be room for review." The attorney shook his head. "Review was anticipated and prepared for. Copies of all evidence are secured with multiple parties." Mom whispered, "She couldn't have meant..." But Grandma's recorded words left no ambiguity. The estate, everything beyond the minor bequests already read, was mine, tied to the vision we shared for helping kids from backgrounds like hers, from families working the land without easy paths forward. Chelsea shifted uncomfortably, glancing between our parents. Aunt Marcia remained silent, the outsider now fully aware of the family's fracture. Grandma's final message echoed in my mind, not just the inheritance but the quiet strength behind it. She chose clarity over confrontation, justice through preparation, rather than spectacle. And in doing so, she shielded what mattered most. The room stayed heavy, no one ready to break the spell her presence had cast one last time. Months later, Mom and Dad faced the consequences they couldn't negotiate away. Civil suits moved forward, steadily filed by the estate's legal team to recover the value of stolen items. Criminal charges followed: misdemeanor theft and attempted fraud, serious enough in California to damage reputations in tight-knit industries like wine. Invitations to tastings and industry events dried up. Longtime contacts kept distance, wary of association. Their names appeared in local reports, not headlines, but enough to close doors that once opened easily. I heard about it through Mr. Langley's updates, never directly from them. Attempts at contact came: emails, voicemails, even a letter forwarded by the attorney, but I let the legal barriers do their job. Restraining orders weren't necessary. A clear no-contact instruction through counsel sufficed. I declined every apology, every request for a meeting. Some bridges once burned stay that way. Chelsea reached out once, a short message asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. Aunt Marcia sent a card expressing regret, but it felt more like covering bases than genuine remorse. I filed them all away, focusing instead on what came next. The estate settled fully into my name. I didn't sell off pieces or redecorate for show. Instead, I converted the East Wing, once guest suites, rarely used, into dedicated space for the education center Grandma and I had mapped out during those quiet afternoons. Architects and contractors transformed rooms into classrooms and offices, preserving the original architecture while adding modern learning areas. The foundation expanded scholarships targeting rural Napa kids from farming families, full coverage for community college state universities, even trade programs for those who wanted hands-on paths. Local teens started coming in for tutoring using resources their schools lacked. I hired staff passionate about the mission, people who understood the Valley's unique challenges. Watching a student light up over an acceptance letter or a parent tear up at a scholarship award made the weight of everything feel purposeful. I kept Grandma's bedroom untouched, visiting sometimes to sit by the window where she recorded her final message. The view hadn't changed, rows of vines stretching under clear skies, seasons cycling as reliably as ever. Her shawl still hung on the chair, a quiet reminder. Living here alone at first felt strange, the house too large for one person. But it filled gradually with purpose: staff during the day, students for evening sessions, community events on weekends. I traveled when needed, overseeing foundation growth, but always returned to this core. Independence became my new normal. Decisions about the vineyards, the label, investments, all mine to make, guided by what Grandma taught about integrity over quick gains. Profits funded more programs, creating a cycle she would have approved. Cutting ties completely wasn't easy. Birthdays passed without calls, holidays without obligation. Some nights, old memories surfaced, the good ones, before greed overshadowed everything. But I didn't second-guess the boundary. Protecting my peace meant accepting that family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the connections you choose and nurture. Grandma's legacy taught me that truth, once revealed, demands action. Hers was building something lasting from nothing. Mine became honoring that by giving others the tools she never had. Strength isn't in holding on, it's knowing when to let go and build forward. Money exposes character, but character determines what you do with what's left. I chose to create opportunity where none existed, turning inheritance into impact. And in doing so, I found the freedom Grandma always wanted for me, living authentically without looking back.